The heavy oak door was slightly ajar, leaking a sliver of golden light into the darkened, marble-floored hallway. Luna froze, her hand hovering over the brass handle, her heart suddenly pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. From inside the study, David's voice cut through the silence, cold, authoritative, and entirely unyielding. "Luna," he scoffed, the sound utterly devoid of the warmth he usually reserved for her in private. "She is a liability, Marcus. A momentary lapse in judgment. Claiming her was a miscalculation that weakens my standing with the council. She is a mistake I fully intend to rectify." The words struck like physical blows, stealing the air from her lungs. She didn't gasp. She didn't cry out. She simply stepped back into the shadows. She heard the Alpha King call her a mistake, so she disappeared into the night. The silence of the hallway pressed against Luna's eardrums, a suffocating weight that threatened to pull her under. She didn't wait to hear Marcus's gravelly reply. The confirmation of her deepest, most paralyzing fear had already been spoken by the one voice she had trusted above all others. David, the man who held the absolute power of the Alpha King, the man who had whispered promises into her skin just hours prior, saw her as nothing more than a strategic error. Survival instincts, honed from a lifetime of being on the outside looking in, instantly overrode the shattering grief in her chest. A cold, absolute logic took the wheel. If she was a mistake he intended to rectify, in the ruthless, dynastic world of modern pack politics, rectify rarely meant a peaceful separation. It meant erasure. She turned and moved down the corridor, her footsteps entirely soundless against the Persian runners. She bypassed the grand staircase, opting for the servants' stairwell that descended toward the east wing. Her mind was a sterile, calculating machine. There was no time for tears. Tears blurred vision, and right now, she needed to see everything with razor-sharp clarity. Entering their shared suite, his suite, she corrected herself bitterly. She bypassed the sprawling walk-in closet filled with designer dresses and tailored coats he had bought for her. Those were the trappings of a gilded cage. Instead, she moved to the small cedar chest at the foot of the bed. From it, she pulled the faded canvas duffel bag she had arrived with 8 months ago. Methodically, she packed 3 pairs of dark, durable jeans, a handful of neutral-colored sweaters, thermal socks. She ignored the jewelry box on the vanity, save for one item. She approached the mirror, refusing to meet her own devastated gaze in the glass. Her fingers reached up to the nape of her neck, unfastening the heavy silver clasp of the wolf head pendant. It was the insignia of his protection, a beacon to anyone in their hidden society that she belonged to the king. It clattered softly against the polished mahogany of the dresser. It looked heavy. It looked like a chain. From the hidden compartment in her old leather boots, she retrieved a wad of emergency cash. Human currency, untraceable and universally accepted. She left her smartphone on the nightstand. It was equipped with military-grade GPS, a necessity, David had claimed, for her safety. Now, it was a leash. She took only an old analog watch and a prepaid burner phone she had kept hidden since her days before the pack. The digital clock on the wall read 11:42 p.m. The estate's perimeter security shifted at midnight. There was a 3-minute window when the overlapping patrol routes of the perimeter guards left the southern garden wall unobserved. She had learned this not out of a desire to escape, but from a habit of anxious observation, a leftover trait from a life lived constantly on guard. Luna slipped out the French doors, welcoming the sudden, biting chill of the autumn air. A heavy rain had begun to fall, washing the meticulously manicured grounds in a slick, gray sheen. It was perfect. The downpour would mask her scent, diluting it into the damp earth and wet pine until it was indistinguishable from the storm itself. She moved quickly, keeping her silhouette low against the manicured hedges. The estate was a fortress of glass, steel, and ancient stone, a monument to David's absolute authority. She reached the southern wall just as the distant beam of a guard's flashlight swept past the greenhouse. She counted the seconds. 1, 2, 3. With a surge of adrenaline, she scaled the rough stone of the wall. The rough edges scraped her palms, but the pain grounded her. It was real. This was real. She threw her leg over the top and dropped down into the dense, untamed forest that bordered the estate. When her boots hit the muddy forest floor, a profound, terrifying freedom washed over her. She did not look back at the glowing windows of the mansion. She turned her face toward the highway, miles away through the dense timber, and began to run. The rain plastered her hair to her cheeks, hiding the single, silent tear that finally slipped free. Luna was gone. David stood by the grand window of his study, swirling the amber liquid in his crystal tumbler. The storm outside raged, a chaotic mirror to the tension knotting his shoulders. Behind him, Marcus, the eldest of the council, finally closed the leather-bound ledger. "It is settled, then," Marcus grunted, adjusting his bespoke suit. "The Eastern Territories will fall in line, provided they believe you remain entirely focused on the Syndicate's expansion. Showing weakness, showing attachment to an unpedigreed outsider, would have sparked a civil war, David. You know this." "I am aware of the politics, Marcus," David replied, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He turned, his jaw clenched so tightly it ached. He had played the game. He had fed the council the exact, ruthless rhetoric they needed to hear to back off. By calling Luna a mistake, by degrading her value in front of Marcus, he had successfully removed the target from her back. The council would no longer view her as a weakness to be exploited or eliminated. They would view her as a passing fancy soon to be discarded. It was a calculated, necessary lie to keep her breathing. "See that you rectify the situation quietly," Marcus advised, moving toward the door. "The king cannot afford distractions." "Good night, Marcus," David said, the dismissal absolute. As the heavy oak door clicked shut, the oppressive, calculating facade of the Alpha King fractured. David set the glass down so hard the crystal nearly shattered. He ran a hand over his face, a deep, ragged sigh escaping his lips. He hated the politics. He hated the lies he had to tell to protect the one thing in this sprawling, blood-soaked empire that actually mattered to him. He needed to see her. He needed to pull Luna into his arms, breathe in the scent of vanilla and rain that always clung to her skin, and explain the twisted theatrics of his world. He needed her to know that she wasn't a mistake. She was the only right choice he had ever made. David strode out of the study, his long legs eating up the distance down the marble corridor. He took the grand staircase 2 steps at a time, bypassing the guards who bowed their heads respectfully. He pushed open the double doors to their suite. "Luna, The words died in his throat. The room was immaculately clean, illuminated only by the soft glow of the bedside lamp. The bed was perfectly made. The air felt stale, lacking the vibrant, comforting warmth of her presence. A primal, instinctual panic flared in the center of his chest. His wolf, usually tightly leashed beneath the surface of the polished billionaire CEO, snarled in sudden, blind distress. "Luna?" he called out, his voice cracking slightly. He moved into the massive bathroom. Empty. The walk-in closet. Her extravagant clothes still hung in perfect rows, but the subtle, underlying scent of her was fading. Then His eyes caught the gleam of silver on the mahogany dresser. David approached it slowly, as if approaching a live explosive. There, resting on the polished wood, was the wolf head pendant. Next to it sat the sleek smartphone he had given her. He picked up the silver chain. It was cold. She heard. The realization hit him with the force of a freight train. The door to his study had been slightly open. She must have come down. She must have heard the exact moment he traded her dignity for her safety, without understanding the context. She heard the Alpha King call her a mistake. "No," David whispered, the sound raw and desperate. "No, no, no." He spun around, his senses extending outward, desperately searching the perimeter of the estate for her unique scent. Nothing. Only the overwhelming, suffocating smell of the torrential rain outside. She was smart. She knew how to move unseen. He grabbed the radio from the nightstand, his thumb slamming down on the transmission button. "Beta Command. Lock down the estate. Now, seal the perimeter. I need every tracker on the grounds, immediately. Alpha?" His Beta's voice crackled back, laced with confusion. "We have a perimeter breach on the south wall, but we assumed it was storm debris setting off the sensors. What is the target?" David gripped the silver pendant so tightly the metal bit into his palm, drawing a single drop of blood. He stared at the empty room, the absolute silence ringing in his ears. He had played a game of chess with the council, and in doing so, he had knocked over his own queen. "Not the target," David breathed, his voice trembling with a terrifying, devastating rage directed entirely at himself. "Is the queen. Find her." 3 years. It was a significant amount of time for a human. But for those with the blood of wolves running through their veins, 3 years was nothing more than a long, painful breath. The coastal town of Blackwood, Oregon, was a place where people went to be forgotten. It was a gray, rain-battered stretch of civilization clinging to the edge of the Pacific Ocean, populated by fishermen, transient loggers, and ghosts. Luna fit right in. The bell above the door of the Seaside 24/7 Urgent Care and Veterinary Clinic chimed cheerfully, a stark contrast to the dreary weather outside. Luna didn't look up from the stainless steel examination table she was aggressively scrubbing with bleach. "We're closed for walk-ins, Jimmy," Luna called out, assuming it was the local dock worker looking for more gauze for his perpetually scraped knuckles. "Go to the county hospital if you're bleeding again." "I'm not, Jimmy," a rough, strained voice rasped. Luna's hand stilled. The voice wasn't local. It was too sharp, too disciplined, despite the obvious pain laced through it. She took a slow, measured breath, letting the clinical smell of bleach fill her lungs, deliberately suppressing her own heightened senses. She had spent 3 years learning to mask her scent, utilizing harsh chemicals and a grueling diet of local herbs to bury the subtle, sweet aroma that would mark her to her own kind. She lived as a human. She acted as a human. She finally turned around. Leaning heavily against the doorframe was a man in his late 20s. He was soaking wet, his dark windbreaker plastered to his broad shoulders. He was clutching his left side, and a dark, ominous stain was rapidly spreading across the gray fabric, dripping onto Luna's freshly mopped linoleum floor. But it wasn't the blood that made Luna's stomach plummet into her shoes. It was the way the man held himself. Even injured, his posture was rigidly military. And as he shifted his weight, his jacket fell open slightly, revealing a flash of skin on his collarbone. There, etched in stark black ink, was a jagged crown intertwined with a crescent moon. It was the Syndicate's mark, David's mark. Logic demanded she run out the back door immediately. 3 years of careful planning, of building a quiet, solitary life, where she was simply Dr. Evans, the aloof but capable clinician who asked no questions, was suddenly crumbling. If this man was here, it meant the perimeter of her safe haven had been breached. "Lock the door behind you and pull the blinds," Luna said, her voice dropping into a flat, authoritative register she hadn't used since the night she fled the estate. The man blinked, surprised by her lack of panic. Most humans would be screaming for the police. He fumbled with the deadbolt and snapped the plastic blinds shut, casting the small clinic into shadow. He stumbled forward and collapsed into one of the plastic waiting room chairs, groaning as his head fell back. "Gunshot or claw?" Luna asked, stepping out from behind the counter. She pulled on a pair of blue latex gloves, her movements precise and devoid of emotion. The man's eyes snapped open, locking onto hers. The pupils were slightly dilated, the amber rim around his iris glowing faintly in the dim light. "A wolf. Silver bullet," he gritted out, his breathing becoming shallow. "Passed clean through, I think. But the poisoning, it's burning." Luna approached him, grabbing a pair of heavy trauma shears from her utility belt. "Who shot you? Rival faction," he gasped as she expertly sliced his windbreaker open, exposing the bloody entry wound just below his ribs. "Ambush. I was tracking a lead on the king's orders." Luna's hands didn't shake. Her face remained a mask of perfect, chilling indifference. "The king is a long way from Oregon. What lead could possibly bring his guard out to the edge of the map?" The man looked up at her, his vision clearly swimming as the silver toxicity ravaged his advanced immune system. He squinted, trying to focus on her face. "A ghost," he whispered weakly. "He sent us to chase a ghost." He passed out, his head lolling to the side. Luna stood in the quiet clinic, the harsh fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. She looked down at the bleeding enforcer of the man who had broken her. She could let him die. It would be the safest, most logical thing to do. She could drag his body to the cliffs and let the Pacific Ocean swallow him, preserving her secret. But as she looked at the syndicate tattoo on his collarbone, a cold, hard realization settled over her. David was still looking. After 3 years, the Alpha King hadn't given up. And now, his violence had bled onto her doorstep. She turned and marched toward the locked medical cabinet in the back. She wasn't that scared girl running into the night anymore. If the king's world wanted to pull her back in, they were going to find out exactly what kind of monster the darkness had forged her into. The stench of burnt ozone and rotting copper filled the sterile air of the clinic. It was the distinct, unmistakable odor of silver toxicity ravaging a werewolf's cellular structure. Luna moved with the mechanical precision of a seasoned trauma surgeon, her mind compartmentalizing the overwhelming reality that the King's Syndicate was currently bleeding out on her examination table. Panic was a luxury she had discarded 3 years ago. Right now, there was only the puzzle of anatomy, chemistry, and survival. She retrieved a tray of surgical instruments from the autoclave, the polished steel gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. She did not bother with anesthetics. Human painkillers were virtually useless against a wolf's metabolism, and standard sedatives would only interact violently with the silver already poisoning his bloodstream. Instead, she strapped thick leather restraints across his chest and thighs, securing him to the steel table. She had installed them for erratic, injured wildlife, but they served this purpose perfectly. With a pair of heavy forceps, she probed the entry wound. The enforcer, whose tactical vest bore a faded name tape reading Elias, convulsed, a low guttural snarl ripping from his throat even in his unconscious state. "Stay with me, Elias," Luna murmured, her voice steady. devoid of the tremor that used to plague her in David's sprawling estate. She applied pressure to the surrounding tissue, isolating the foreign object. The silver bullet had shattered against his lower rib, sending toxic shrapnel deep into the muscle fiber. Using a surgical scalpel, Luna meticulously widened the tract. Her hands, clad in blue latex, were steady. In her former life, before David had swept her into his terrifying world, she had been 2 years into a demanding medical residency. She had traded the ER for the pack out of love, a decision she had paid for with her identity. Now, those dormant skills were her primary weapon. Piece by piece, she extracted the fractured silver. Each time a fragment dropped into the metal kidney basin with a sharp clink, Elias's breathing eased a fraction of an inch. After 30 agonizing minutes, she flushed the wound with a localized saline solution, heavily laced with a synthesized wolfsbane derivative. It was highly illegal in the pack world. A compound she had painstakingly reverse-engineered to neutralize silver toxicity without triggering a lethal allergic reaction. It was also the exact chemical she used daily in microdoses to completely mask her own scent. As she began suturing the muscle wall, Elias's eyelids fluttered. His amber eyes, cloudy with pain, slowly tried to focus on the ceiling, then drifted down to the woman standing over him. Luna didn't flinch. She tied off the final suture and snipped the thread. "You're in a private clinic," Luna stated, her tone thoroughly professional and utterly detached. "You took a fragmented silver round to the left oblique. I have removed the shrapnel and neutralized the immediate toxicity. You will live, provided you don't tear these stitches." Elias strained against the leather straps, his jaw clenching as he tested his bounds. "A human doctor," he rasped, his voice sounding like grinding stones. "Who uses wolfsbane in an IV drip? You know what I am. I know that I run an urgent care on the edge of a timber town where poachers occasionally shoot things they shouldn't." Luna countered smoothly, stripping off her bloody gloves and tossing them into a biohazard bin. "I don't ask questions about my patient's biology. I patch holes. That is the extent of our transaction." Elias let his head fall back against the paper-lined table, his chest heaving. The aggressive posturing faded, replaced by profound exhaustion. They said there was a ghost on the coast, a doctor who could fix anything and smelled like nothing but bleach and rain. Luna froze, her back to him as she washed her hands at the stainless steel sink. The soap suddenly felt like ice against her skin. They said. "Who is they?" she asked, keeping her voice incredibly flat. "The whispers in the rogue territories," Elias breathed, closing his eyes. "We were tracking a rumor for the king. A woman who vanished. He thought the ghost might be her." Luna shut off the faucet. The silence in the clinic was deafening, broken only by the rhythmic drumming of the rain against the reinforced glass. David hadn't just been looking for her. He had been turning over the darkest, most hidden corners of the country, chasing rumors of a woman who masked her scent. She grabbed a sterile towel, drying her hands with slow, deliberate motions. The isolation she had so carefully constructed wasn't just cracking, it was already shattered. The boardroom on the top floor of the syndicate's Chicago headquarters was a masterpiece of modern intimidation. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping view of a city that David practically owned. Yet the atmosphere inside the room was as suffocating as a crypt. David sat at the head of the obsidian table, his posture relaxed, but radiating a lethal, coiled energy. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that cost more than most people made in a decade. But his eyes, rimmed with the subtle, bruised exhaustion of a man who hadn't slept deeply in 3 years, were hollow. Across from him sat the regional alphas, men and women of immense power, all shifting uncomfortably under his dead-eyed stare. "The eastern supply lines have been secured," Marcus announced, his gravelly voice breaking the oppressive silence. The elder wolf looked older, his face lined with the stress of managing a king who had lost his tether to humanity. "Revenues are up 30%. The rival factions have retreated to the Canadian border. Your consolidation of power is absolute, David." David didn't blink. He stared at the digital map illuminated on the table screen, noting the vast territories painted in the Syndicate's blue. It was an empire forged in ruthlessness, built on the very political alliances he had once lied to protect. "Revenues do not interest me today, Marcus," David said. His voice was soft, barely more than a murmur, yet it carried the terrifying weight of absolute authority. "What interests me is the silence from Elias's strike team." The regional alphas exchanged nervous glances. Marcus cleared his throat. "Alpha, Elias was dispatched on a rumor. A whisper from a rogue informant about a scentless healer in Oregon. It was a ghost hunt. Sending a Tier 1 team was unorthodox." "Do not question my methods, Marcus," David replied, his tone remaining perfectly level, which only made it more terrifying. "I asked for a status report, not a critique." Before Marcus could respond, the heavy mahogany doors of the boardroom opened. David's beta, Silas, stepped inside. His face was pale, his jaw set in a rigid line. He carried a secure encrypted tablet, walking straight past the regional leaders to hand it directly to David. "We just received an emergency ping on the secure network, Alpha," Silas said, his voice tight. "The strike team was ambushed outside a coastal town called Blackwood. 3 casualties. 1 MIA, Elias." David took the tablet, his thumb swiping across the screen to decrypt the final transmission. The video footage was chaotic, dashcam footage from one of their armored SUVs. Rain lashed against the windshield. There were flashes of gunfire, the blurring shapes of rival enforcers rushing the vehicle. But what caught David's eye wasn't the violence. It was the geographic coordinates blinking in the corner of the screen. Blackwood, Oregon. He zoomed in on a still frame from the video. A brief flash of a road sign illuminated by headlights. "Seaside Urgent Care. 5 miles. A scentless healer. An urgent care on the edge of the world. A doctor who asked no questions." David closed his eyes, a violent shudder racking his massive frame. For 3 years, he had operated on cold, unfeeling logic. He had expanded his empire, crushed his enemies, and played the perfect, ruthless king, all while a gaping, bleeding void consumed his chest. He had pushed her away with a calculated lie to save her life, only to lose her entirely. "She was a medical resident," David whispered, the words escaping him before he could stop them. The boardroom went dead silent. The alphas looked at each other in utter confusion. "Alpha?" Silas asked cautiously. David's eyes snapped open. The hollow emptiness was gone, replaced by a raging, blinding inferno that made the air in the room crackle with static electricity. The wolf beneath his skin, dormant and despairing for years, was suddenly hurling itself against the bars of his ribcage. "I fuel the jet," David commanded, standing up so abruptly his heavy leather chair skidded backward. He bypassed Marcus entirely, his long strides eating up the distance to the door. "Assemble a retrieval team. No weapons drawn. If anyone fires a single shot in that town, I will personally tear their throat out." "David, be reasonable," Marcus pleaded, standing up. "An ambush means the territory is hot. You cannot leave the headquarters to chase." David turned, his eyes flashing a brilliant, terrifying gold. The sheer pressure of his aura forced Marcus back into his chair, gasping for air. "I am the king, Marcus, and I am going to reclaim my queen." The storm broke just before dawn, leaving the coastal town of Blackwood drenched in a pale, muted gray light. Inside the clinic, the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound. Luna sat at her desk, nursing a mug of black coffee. She hadn't slept. Her go bag, a waterproof tactical backpack she had kept packed for 3 years, sat by the rear exit. She had spent the night systematically wiping the clinic's digital servers, erasing Dr. Evans from the local grid. In the back room, Elias shifted, groaning as consciousness returned. Luna stood up, picking up a steaming mug of dark liquid from the counter, and walked into the recovery room. Elias looked vastly better. The supernatural healing factor of his kind, freed from the Silver's interference, had already begun knitting the muscle tissue back together. He looked at the leather straps securing his wrists, then up at Luna. "Precautionary," Luna said simply, setting the mug on a rolling tray and pushing it within his reach. "Drink this. It will flush the remaining heavy metals from your liver." Elias eyed the dark tea suspiciously. He leaned forward, sniffing it, his brow furrowed. "It smells like earth and bitter root. Wolfsbane, you're trying to poison me." "If I wanted you dead, Enforcer, I would have left the silver in your chest," Luna replied, crossing her arms. Her voice was remarkably calm. "Drink it, or don't. Your necrosis is not my problem once you leave this building." Elias hesitated, then picked up the mug with a slightly shaking hand. He took a sip, wincing at the bitter taste, but swallowed. He leaned back, his amber eyes tracking her every movement. "You're too calm," Elias noted, his tactical mind beginning to put the pieces together. "A normal human would be terrified by how quickly I'm healing. A normal human wouldn't know how to extract a fragmented silver round without severing an artery. And a normal human doctor doesn't have a burner phone and a bug-out bag sitting by the back door. I value my privacy," Luna said smoothly, checking his IV line. "And I don't like getting involved in gang warfare, which is why you need to be gone by noon." Elias watched her hands. They were steady, professional, but his eyes caught a faint, thin line of pale skin at the base of her throat. A scar. Not from a blade, but a friction scar. The kind left by wearing a heavy, metal chain every single day for months, only to abruptly stop. He looked at her face. The harsh fluorescent lighting washed out her features, but he recognized the bone structure. He remembered the brief, blurry photographs the King's Inner Circle had been handed 3 years ago with a singular, desperate mandate. Find her. Elias's breath hitched. His heart rate monitor suddenly spiked, the rhythmic beeping accelerating into a rapid trill. "Your heart rate is elevating," Luna observed, reaching for a syringe of mild sedative. "Calm down, or you'll pop those stitches." "You," Elias breathed, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and absolute terror. He looked at her, truly looked at her, stripping away the drab medical scrubs and the harsh chemical smell she used to hide herself. "It's you." Luna's hand paused in midair. She didn't ask what he meant. She didn't feign ignorance. The cold, logical part of her brain calculated the distance to the back door, the weight of her bag, the time it would take to hotwire the old pickup truck she kept parked in the alley. "The king," Elias whispered, struggling against the restraints not to escape, but in a sudden, desperate urge to bow his head. "He destroyed the Western Territories looking for you. He broke the council. He is going to burn this world to the ground to get you back." "The king," Luna replied, her voice dropping the clinical facade. revealing the hardened, unbreakable woman beneath. Made his choice, and I made mine. I am not a mistake to be rectified, Elias. I am a ghost. Suddenly, the clinic's perimeter alarm chirped. A sharp, high-pitched sequence that indicated a breach at the front gate. Luna's head snapped toward the front of the building. She didn't need to look at the security monitors. The heavy, unmistakable crunch of tactical tires on wet gravel echoed through the quiet morning air. Not one vehicle. Several. They tracked my comms, Elias realized, panic lacing his voice. When my team went down, the locator beacon, Luna didn't wait for him to finish. She turned and sprinted toward the back door, grabbing her go bag. She had survived by running once. She could do it again. But as her hand hit the metal push bar of the rear exit, a shadow fell over the frosted glass. A massive silhouette, impossibly broad, and radiating a terrifying, suffocating pressure that made the very air in the clinic feel heavy. The back door rattled as someone on the outside gripped the handle. Luna froze. Her highly trained logic screamed at her to find another way out. But her heart, the heart she had tried so desperately to freeze, began to pound a frantic, familiar rhythm against her ribs. He was here. The heavy metal door groaned under an immense, supernatural pressure, the reinforced deadbolt screaming in protest before snapping with a violent, metallic crack. The door swung outward into the pouring rain. There, silhouetted by the pale, gray morning light and the torrential downpour, stood David. Luna's breath caught in her throat, a purely involuntary betrayal of the ironclad control she had maintained for 3 years. He was thoroughly soaked, his expensive dark clothing clinging to his massive frame. The water ran down the sharp, aristocratic planes of his face, dripping from his jawline. He looked exactly the same, yet fundamentally altered. The polished, untouchable veneer of the billionaire CEO was entirely gone. In its place stood the primal, lethal Alpha King, his chest heaving, his eyes burning with a brilliant, devastating gold that illuminated the dim shadows of the clinic's hallway. Time seemed to fracture, slowing to a crawling, agonizing crawl. Luna's grip on the straps of her tactical backpack tightened until her knuckles turned a stark, bruised white. She did not step back. She did not cower. The medical resident who had once hidden in the shadows of his grand estate was dead. The woman standing before him was a survivor, forged in isolation and necessity. David stepped over the threshold, moving with a terrifying, predatory grace. The ambient temperature in the hallway seemed to plummet, the sheer gravity of his aura pressing against the walls. He ignored the blaring perimeter alarm. He ignored the smell of blood and chemicals. His golden eyes were locked entirely, obsessively, on her. "You cut your hair," David whispered. His voice was hoarse, rough like grinding stones, carrying the weight of 1,000 sleepless nights. It was a mundane, nonsensical observation, in the face of the chaos surrounding them, but it carried an ocean of unspoken grief. "It was a tactical necessity," Luna replied, her voice dropping into a flat, icy register. She met his glowing stare with absolute, unyielding calm. "Long hair is a liability in trauma care. It gives an opponent something to grab." David flinched, the subtle movement speaking volumes. He took a slow, agonizing step forward, his hand raising slightly as if he desperately wanted to reach out, but terrified that the illusion of her would shatter if he did. "Luna, 3 years. I tore the continent apart. You should have saved your resources." Luna countered smoothly, shifting her weight slightly, her analytical mind calculating the distance between them. "I am perfectly capable of existing without the Syndicate's oversight." In fact, I prefer it. Now, you need to step aside. Your enforcer's locator beacon has drawn a hostile element to my front door. Before David could respond to the icy dismissal, the heavy crunch of boots on gravel echoed from the front of the clinic. The perimeter alarm suddenly cut out, not deactivated, but brutally destroyed. David's demeanor shifted in a microscopic fraction of a second. The heartbroken man vanished, instantly replaced by the ruthless tactician. He tilted his head, his heightened senses sweeping the building. 3 vehicles, 12 combatants. Heart rates are elevated, erratic. They are not my men. Elias was ambushed by a rival faction, Luna stated, dropping her go-bag to the floor with a heavy thud. Running was no longer an option. The perimeter was compromised. They tracked him here. They want to finish the job. They will find nothing but their own graves, David growled, the sound vibrating in the narrow hallway. He finally closed the distance between them, stepping into her personal space. The familiar, intoxicating scent of pine and electricity washed over her, battling the harsh smell of bleach she wore like armor. Get behind me, Luna. Lock yourself in the surgical suite. I will handle this. It was a command born of instinct, the alpha protecting his mate. 3 years ago, she would have obeyed without question. Today, she looked at him with an expression of profound, tired disbelief. I don't hide behind anyone anymore, David, Luna said, her voice completely devoid of fear. She reached into the deep cargo pocket of her scrubs and pulled out a heavy, matte black tranquilizer pistol, modified to fire specialized chemical rounds. This is my clinic. I know the blind spots. I know the sight lines. You do not. David stared at the weapon in her hand, a profound shock briefly fracturing his predatory focus. She was not the fragile human he had lied to protect. She was a weapon in her own right. A deafening crash shattered the silence as the front glass doors of the clinic were blown inward. The unmistakable pop of suppressed gunfire followed, tearing through the drywall of the waiting room. Left corridor is a choke point, Luna instructed, her voice a calm, professional bark over the gunfire. She racked the slide of the pistol. Funnel them there. Do not damage the structural load-bearing walls. Let's go to work. The sterile environment of the clinic transformed instantly into a brutal, close-quarters battleground. The rival faction, fueled by adrenaline and the promise of eliminating a high-ranking syndicate enforcer, poured through the shattered front entrance. They were heavily armed, moving with the chaotic aggression of wolves operating outside the strict, disciplined parameters of a true alpha's command. David moved like a shadow detached from the physical realm. He intercepted the first 3 attackers in the narrow confines of the reception area. He did not shift into his wolf form. It was unnecessary and tactically foolish in the tight space. Instead, he utilized the sheer, devastating physics of his enhanced strength. He caught a swinging tactical baton, twisting the assailant's arm until the bone snapped with a sickening report, using the man's falling body as a shield against the incoming gunfire. From her position behind the reinforced concrete of the reception desk, Luna operated with chilling, detached precision. She was not a fighter in the traditional sense, but she was a master of anatomy and chemistry. When 2 attackers tried to flank David, sweeping down the adjacent corridor, Luna stepped out. She leveled her modified pistol and fired twice. The heavy, glass-tipped darts struck the men in the center of mass, shattering against their tactical vests. They didn't penetrate, but they didn't need to. The darts released a highly concentrated, aerosolized cloud of synthesized wolfsbane and refined capsaicin. The two attackers collapsed instantly, screaming as the chemical agent blinded them and aggressively disrupted their respiratory systems, effectively neutralizing them without a single drop of lethal force. David, having cleared the waiting room, watched her out of the corner of his eye. The awe in his chest temporarily rivaled the blinding rage of combat. She was magnificent. She was terrifying. 4 left. Elias's voice echoed weakly from the surgical suite. The injured enforcer had managed to drag himself off the table, leaning heavily against the doorframe, a scalpel gripped tightly in his good hand. They are sweeping the rear pharmacy. "Stay down, Elias," David commanded, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. A massive, scarred wolf, one of the attackers who had fully shifted, suddenly burst through the drywall, separating the pharmacy from the hallway, lunging directly at Luna. The beast was a terrifying mass of muscle and matted gray fur, jaws snapping toward her throat. David roared, launching himself across the room. He intercepted the wolf midair, the sheer kinetic force of the impact sending them both crashing into the heavy metal shelving units. Medical supplies rained down around them as David brutally subdued the rogue, his hands locking around the beast's throat in a grip of absolute, unforgiving iron. Within moments, the clinic fell silent, save for the heavy breathing of the combatants and the rhythmic drumming of the rain outside. The invading force was entirely incapacitated. David rose slowly from the ruined floor, dusting off his ruined suit jacket. He looked around the devastated clinic, then turned his gaze back to Luna. She was already moving, checking the pulse of a neutralized attacker, her face a mask of clinical indifference. They were highly coordinated, Luna observed, securing the man's hands with heavy medical zip ties. This wasn't a random ambush. They knew Elias was here. They bypassed the local packs entirely. Someone tipped them off, David agreed, his jaw clenching as he connected the tactical dots. The only people who knew Elias's exact coordinates were his inner circle. His counsel. Luna stood up, meeting his eyes across the wreckage. The immediate adrenaline of the fight was fading, leaving behind the heavy, suffocating weight of the past. The physical battle was won, but the emotional war was just beginning. They were carrying syndicate-issued encrypted comms, David continued, his voice dropping an octave as a dark, horrifying realization settled over him. He stepped over the debris, approaching one of the conscious attackers Luna had chemically subdued. David hauled the man up by the collar of his vest, his golden eyes flashing with a promise of absolute agony. "Who gave you the coordinates?" The man coughed, his eyes watering profusely from the capsaicin. He looked at the Alpha King, terror overriding his loyalty. "Marcus," he choked out. "Elder Marcus. He said the king was distracted by a ghost. He gave us the route, told us to eliminate the distraction permanently. The silence that followed was absolute. The betrayal wasn't just a political maneuver. It was an assassination attempt orchestrated from the very top of David's own empire." Luna slowly lowered her pistol, her brilliant mind rapidly processing the tactical and political implications. "He wanted you here, David. He wanted you off the board." The pale morning sun finally broke through the heavy rain clouds, casting long, sharp shadows across the ruined floor of the clinic. Outside, a team of highly vetted syndicate operatives, personally loyal to David, entirely separate from the council, were silently and efficiently cleaning up the perimeter. Inside the surgical suite, the atmosphere was thick with unresolved tension. Elias had been stabilized and moved to a transport vehicle. David and Luna were finally alone. Luna sat on the edge of her stainless steel examination table, meticulously cleaning her modified pistol with a sterile wipe. It gave her hands something to do, a way to channel the chaotic energy vibrating in her chest. David stood a few feet away, leaning against the doorframe. He looked exhausted, the adrenaline of combat fading into a profound, heavy sorrow. He watched her hands, mesmerized by her competence. "I owe you an explanation," David finally said, his voice quiet, devoid of the Alpha's command. It was the voice of a man standing before a judge. "You don't owe me anything, David," Luna replied smoothly, not looking up from the weapon. "The situation is logically clear. Your elder councilman orchestrated a coup. He used my existence, the distraction, as the catalyst to draw you out of your fortified headquarters. Now that is the current tactical reality," David agreed, taking a slow step into the room. "But I am talking about 3 years ago, the night you left." Luna's hands finally stilled. The sterile wipe fell to the floor. She slowly looked up, her dark eyes locking onto his. The icy, protective walls she had built around her heart threatened to crack under the sheer intensity of his gaze. "I heard you, David. The door was open. I heard you tell Marcus that claiming me was a miscalculation, a mistake you intended to rectify." David closed his eyes, a sharp intake of breath hissing through his teeth. Hearing the words repeated back to him, stripped of their context, felt like a physical knife in his ribs. "You were a human medical resident thrust into a world of apex predators," David explained, his voice thick with raw emotion. "The council viewed you as a weakness. They were plotting to use you against me, to leverage your life for my compliance. If they believed I valued you above all else, you would have been assassinated within the month." Luna stared at him, her brilliant mind perfectly dissecting the logic of his statement. "I lied to Marcus," David continued, opening his eyes. The golden hue completely gone, leaving only the desperate, pleading brown of his human form. "I degraded you in front of him to remove the target from your back. I told them you were a passing fancy so they would lose interest. It was a calculated political maneuver to keep you breathing while I dismantled their power structure from the inside." Luna absorbed the information. It made perfect, terrifying sense. It aligned with the ruthless, chess-like nature of pack politics. He hadn't stopped loving her. He had thrown her to the wolves rhetorically to save her physically. "You played a game of chess with my life," Luna said, her voice eerily calm. "You made a strategic move without informing your own peace. I was going to tell you." David stepped closer, his hands raising in a gesture of surrender. "I went upstairs that night to explain everything. But you were already gone, and the silence you left behind nearly destroyed me." Luna looked down at her hands. They were calloused now, scarred from hard work and survival. She was no longer the girl who had packed a duffel bag in tears. "I am not angry about the lie, David," Luna finally said, looking back up, her gaze steady and unbroken. "Logically, it was the only move that guaranteed my survival. But you failed to understand one fundamental truth." David paused, waiting. "I am not a liability," Luna stated, her voice echoing with absolute authority. "I survived for 3 years on my own. I built a fortress. I reverse-engineered your poisons. I defended this territory today. I am not a fragile thing to be shielded in the dark while you fight the monsters." David looked at the woman before him. The realization hit him with the force of a tidal wave. She had never been weak. He had just been too blinded by his own fear of losing her to see her true strength. "You are right," David whispered, the absolute truth of her words settling into his bones. He took the final step, dropping slowly to one knee before her. It was a gesture of absolute, unyielding submission, something the Alpha King had never done for any living soul. "You are not a liability. You are a queen." He reached out, his large, warm hands gently enveloping hers. "I am returning to Chicago tonight. I am going to tear Marcus's empire down to the bedrock for what he did today, and for the 3 years he stole from us. I am asking you to come with me, not as a secret to be hidden, but as my equal, to rule beside me." Luna looked down at the man who had broken her heart to save her life. The clinical detachment melted away, replaced by a fierce, burning resolve. She had run into the night a terrified girl. She was returning as a force of nature. "Give me 10 minutes to pack my medical supplies," Luna said, a faint, dangerous smile playing on her lips. "If we are going to war, David, we are going to need a very good trauma surgeon." The private jet climbed sharply through the storm clouds, breaking into the brilliant, unobstructed sunlight above the Oregon coast. Below them, the small clinic in Blackwood remained, a silent monument to the crucible that had forged them. Luna sat beside David in the luxurious cabin, her hand resting comfortably in his. She was no longer running from the shadows of his world. She was returning to conquer them. The Alpha King had found his missing piece, not by shielding a fragile human, but by recognizing the lethal, brilliant queen she had always been. Their reign was just beginning, and Chicago was about to face a storm unlike any it had ever seen. Thank you so much for reading this dramatic, high-stakes romance. If you enjoyed Luna's logical brilliance and David's relentless devotion, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more original, cinematic audio stories. Let me know in the comments what you thought of the twist.